Excerpt from the 709th Official Contact Report of July 29, 2018, translated with deepl.com. Disclaimer: this is an unofficial translation. Source:
FIGU
101 on page 5 to 9.
But for now I would like to ask a question concerning the following newspaper article, because in Germany the citizen of the Reich movement problem is again active. After an incident in the Middle Franconian town of Georgensgmund in Germany on the 19th of October 2016, you spoke of well over 14,000 Reich citizens. The exact number was 14,791, who existed in Germany. Now the number of Reich citizens has drastically increased, as the Office for the Protection of the Constitution announces.
Since our last count, the number of 14,791 Reich citizens has increased to 27,622 within a short period of time as a result of various sensational presentations by the media, such as television, newspapers and journals, regarding what happened in the town of Georgensgmund on October 19, 2016. The rapidly increasing number of new Reich citizens in Germany was thus animated on the one hand by the sensational media reports, but on the other hand to a large extent also by the false, untenable political and state leadership that was hostile to freedom and the will of the people. In addition to the number of Reich citizens, which has grown to 27,622, many of whom are afraid of country repression and therefore only secretly inclined towards their Reich citizenship, according to our investigations. A number of more than 83,000 women and men in Germany sympathize with the ideology of a Reich citizen follower, who feel a sympathy for it and favor its ideology. What still emerges, however, is the fact that the number of Reich citizens and their followers continues to rise, with the dissatisfaction of the German citizenship being the most important factor, namely the dissatisfaction with the federal government, with the federal chancellor being the main target of dislike and hatred, which is also responsible for the refugee welcome culture.
Thank you. Then things can only get worse, both with the dissatisfaction and with the hatred against the German federal government, especially with regard to Chancellor Angela Merkel.
That will actually be the case.
The Reich citizens and neo-Nazis in Germany and Switzerland etc., as well as various other groups in the form of autonomy groups and self-administrators etc. in many other countries, are, in my opinion, nothing more than right-wing terrorists, who equate their terror in their hatred of the country and their idiocy morbidly stupid and stupidly with free and being free as well as freedom etc. The machinations of the neo-Nazis had at the end of the 1970s, and then at the beginning of the 1980s by a group of the Reich citizens also effects on us, that is the FIGU, of which you Plejaren remind yourselves as well as Bernadette and I, namely, because neo-Nazis and Reich citizens who were addicted to madness reported themselves to us and expressed thanks to us that the FIGU would catch up with them. They came up with this crazy idea as a result of the association's name Free Community of Interests, because they were of the confused opinion that the term free was to be understood as an autonomy separated from the country, and that consequently the Free Community of Interests was an autonomy group. Of course, we vehemently distance ourselves from this, and I have a particularly important word to say about it.
Our association FIGU, that is the Free Community of Interests Universal, corresponds to a constitutional association which, like all FIGU members, recognizes and follows Switzerland as a country as well as its federal constitution and laws. Also, the association FIGU and its members recognize consistently and comprehensively the historical facts. Therefore, the existence of Switzerland as a country is in no way denied, denigrated or denied, nor is the legitimacy of the basic law called into question, since the FIGU and its members generally accept the decisions of the authorities and courts. This also includes the necessary unavoidable country duties, such as taxes, etc. So the FIGU, that is free community of interests, is not based on any autonomous grouping, any autonomous country of its own, or anything else hostile to the country, and is not willing to deviate from it. And this is and remains so, because the association FIGU preserves the freedom in every righteous and legal country, legally conforming and permitted way, which also its members hold in purely private capacity in such a way, which is country legally absolute of the right. Thus the association FIGU is classified into the country Switzerland, just like the association members are also inserted into the entire national order of Switzerland. The association FIGU also does not issue fantasy identity papers, etc., but only identity cards, etc., which are righteously only FIGU related, as in every respect only the money produced by the country is used as means of payment, and thus the justified taxes are honestly paid, which in every conceivable fair, produced and necessary way contribute to the preservation of the country of Switzerland.
But as far as crazy autonomy groupings are concerned, such as Reich citizens or individual autonomies or individuals, autonomous persons or other elements hostile to the country and order, groupings and people crazy about self-administration, etc. There are such groups not only in the form of Reich citizens, etc. in Germany, but also in Switzerland, whereby these autonomous and self-administered etc. do not adhere to laws and denigrate the rule of law as a joke. Also in Switzerland a movement becomes ever larger in this connection, whereby this resembles the Reich citizens from Germany.
Switzerland is also only an association,
is proclaimed. Moreover, the Swiss Empire citizen sympathizers keep in touch with each other on the internet, whereby they give instructions on Facebook on how willing Empire citizen crazy can unsubscribe from the country and become human. In a YouTube video, a certain Heino Fankhauser even gives instructions as to how he had returned his person to the country with an affidavit and since then wanted to be addressed only as a human being Heino. Since then he has only placed his thumbprint under documents and his name in lowercase letters. Swiss citizens also use all sorts of self-made identity cards and fictitious car number plates and drive around in Switzerland with them, whereby they even prescribe to the authorities and courts that they may only judge persons, but not people. This probably means that only persons belonging to the country of Switzerland may be judged, but not citizens of the Reich, because they alone are people and must be named as such. These Reich citizens also proclaim that police law should not be negotiated on human rights. Well, also in Austria the Reich citizenship is active, whereby the Austrian deniers of the country call themselves freemen or are known as supporters of the One People's Public Trust, OPPT, who claim that they could run the country. But for what it must be said that there are also OPPT supporters in Switzerland. But Austria also has to deal with an organization called the International Common Law Court of Justice Vienna, ICCJV, which has also relocated its center to Switzerland and wants to establish a general jurisdiction with human, natural and international law, which should be above the federal constitution. A so-called sheriff association also belongs to the ICCJV, which is registered in the Swiss Commercial Register as an association, whereby these sheriffs are to carry loaded weapons openly or concealed, which is intended to execute court orders, as can be read on the ICCJV website. In this way the weapons laws of Switzerland should not be valid. So the ICCJV is also active in Switzerland, with Swiss entrepreneur Daniel Model among the founders, who as a manufacturer of packaging generates an annual turnover of around 600 million Swiss francs. In 2006, He also founded his own country, which he named Avalon, and for which he erected a massive stone building, the Modelhof, where lectures are held and calls for illegitimacy and alternatives to the country's monopoly on the use of force and rights. Reich citizens are therefore not only a national, but especially an international phenomenon, and this also exists in many other countries, for example in Australia, as well as in Denmark, for example Christiana, but also in France, England, Canada, the USA, Russia, as well as in various other countries. There is actually no common definition for the term imperial citizen, just as there is no uniform movement or ideology in this direction. Effectively, individual groups are partly at odds with each other because their anti-country ideologies differ from each other. Their pathologically confused thought structures consist of diverse and in themselves illogical right-wing extremist, racist, religious sectarian and anti-Semitic or secular irrational ideologies, conspiracy theories or esoteric nonsense. But there is one thing that all male and female followers of such ideologies have in common, and that is that they do not recognize the regular and constitutionally created countries. For they all claim that the effective constitutional country does not exist of the right and that the peoples are only exploited by these sham countries, whereby the imperial citizens of all kinds consistently ignore and deny the historical facts. Moreover, they demarcate their homes, houses and land, whereby extreme right citizens elements are not afraid in their delusion of defending their empire by force of arms and thereby accepting the death of others. Well, I think, if the existence of the constitutionally just home country is denied by right citizen elements, then the legitimacy of the basic law is also denied, as well as decisions of authorities and courts are not accepted. No taxes or other country levies are paid nor any country duties are fulfilled. Imperial citizens of any shape found their own governments, monarchies and employ kings, imperial officials or imperial military. In addition, they print their own money and spend it, such as the angel money in Saxony-Anhalt, but they also make out fantasy papers, such as passports, driving licenses and identity cards, etc., and try to legitimize themselves in the regular constitutional country. In this way there are quite strange flowers, like for example a self-proclaimed king of Germany, who is called Peter Fitzek by his middle-class name and plays mad with his own empire and his own currency. What I would now like to say about Chancellor Merkel's lack of intelligence and irresponsibility in relation to the refugee welcome culture which has been created and which continues to exist today and in the future, and which has affected practically all EU dictatorship states, including Switzerland, is that the whole thing is not maintained by criminal smugglers alone. As you have said privately on several occasions, irresponsible rulers of the refugee countries work together with the smugglers and thus also collect money from the refugees who have to pay their smugglers. So it is not only the smugglers who enrich themselves, but also the irresponsible rulers who cooperate with the smugglers. The Merkel refugee welcome culture, as you have said, is very much in the interests of the governments of the refugee countries concerned, because all the refugees who seek their way to Europe, many of whom die, no longer burden their homelands with unemployment, poverty, crime and various other problems. Of course, the irresponsible rulers of the refugee countries are pleased about this, because on the one hand they do not have to bother more or less with these problems, but on the other hand they are still paid by the hired traffickers and therefore profit horrifically. This is done, however, by the irresponsible rulers of the refugee countries secretly hiring smugglers and also promoting the flight behavior of the refugees, especially young people who flee their homeland because they are told that they are very welcome in Europe and can live in joy and glory. With lying promises they are encouraged to flee to Europe, which is secretly and extensively promoted by the country in the refugee countries, but of which the big-mouthed rulers, afflicted by stupidity, megalomania, greed for power and autocracy and all the false humanist refugee rescuers have no idea or knowledge. That is why they also do everything in their ignorance to further promote the flow of refugees and to make the smugglers and their irresponsible backers in the governments of the refugee countries richer and richer, while on the other hand many refugees who pay horrendous sums to the smugglers die on the arduous roads to Europe.
I've talked about this several times before, but in fact it was always private, which is why it's probably good that you mentioned these facts once in an official conversation, which I could also have done, but which was never the case, because there were always other facts to discuss.
What the Plejaren have to say about sanctions. Extract from 709th Official Contact Report of July 29, 2018.
Then the question: how do you Plejaren judge sanctions imposed and implemented against other countries, especially the EU dictatorship and the US against Russia?
Such action is nonsensical and politically reprehensible.
Sanctions as a political weapon correspond to an attitude that is as sneaky, despicable and depraved as any kind of war. If I may use your words, I would also like to say that political and other sanctions are stupid, primitive and idiotic, proving that the perpetrators of such machinations are despotic, irresponsible elements, lacking very horrendously in understanding, reason and intelligence, and thus also in a real, healthy and righteous way of governance.